You know, there's a good reason why even the most experienced campers have a healthy fear of the fog. It's not just about losing your bearings. It's about what the fog can hide and what it can bring with it. For a group of 4 friends on what was supposed to be a perfect weekend getaway, they were about to learn that some things lost in the fog are never, ever meant to be found. They thought they knew the woods. They thought they were prepared. But you can't prepare for something that doesn't play by nature's rules. The story I'm about to share is a harrowing tale pieced together from the words of its only 2 survivors. It's a chilling reminder that there are still corners of this world that are completely unknown and utterly hostile. Now, before we get into it, if you're a fan of strange, dark, and mysterious stories like this one, do me a favor and gently poke the algorithm by hitting that subscribe button. It's a tiny click for you, but it makes a world of difference for the channel. All right, ready? Let's begin. Our story is about 4 friends from the city. Liam and his girlfriend Maya, and another couple, Ben and Chloe. Liam was the seasoned outdoors man of the group, and a lot of this story comes directly from him. He'd spent his childhood summers learning trailcraft from his grandfather and had a deep, quiet respect for the wilderness. Maya was practical and level-headed. Exactly the person you want around in a crisis, because she just doesn't panic. She was the planner, the one who remembered the extra batteries and packed a serious first aid kit. Ben was the opposite. He was loud, confident to the point of being arrogant, and he treated this camping trip like just another thing to conquer. He'd bought the most expensive gear imaginable, convinced that top-of-the-line equipment was a good substitute for actual experience. His girlfriend, Chloe, was a sweetheart, but a city girl through and through. The woods made her anxious. Every snap of a twig was a threat. Every shadow held a predator. In a way, Ben's bravado was her security blanket. Their destination was a remote spot in a sprawling national forest, a place famous for its rugged beauty, and, more importantly for Ben, its total lack of cell service. A forced digital detox, he called it. For 3 days, they'd hike, fish, and sit around a campfire, completely unplugged from the world. And that first day, it was idyllic. Postcard perfect. They set up camp by a crystal-clear stream as sunlight filtered through the ancient pines and oaks. Ben, despite his inexperience, actually caught a couple of fish, a victory he did not let anyone forget. Chloe, to her credit, was starting to relax. She even admitted that the silence, once you got used to it, was actually kind of peaceful. That night, they roasted marshmallows under a brilliant, star-filled sky. There was this feeling of profound peace, a sense that they were the only 4 people for 100 miles. Everything was exactly as it should be. The world was normal. But normalcy is a fragile thing, and as they were about to find out, it can be swallowed whole in the blink of an eye. The second day started out just as nice as the first. They took a long hike to a scenic overlook, snapped some pictures, and headed back to camp in the late afternoon, tired but happy. And that's when Liam first noticed it. The air had gone still. Not just calm, it was unnaturally silent. The usual background noise of the forest, the birds, the bugs, the squirrels, it had all just faded away into a heavy, oppressive quiet. Then they saw it. Rolling in from the valley below was a wall of white so thick and uniform it didn't look like weather. It looked solid. It was fog, but it was unlike any fog Liam had ever seen. Normal fog has texture. It wisps and curls. It moves with the breeze. This was a cohesive blanketing mass, and it was moving against the light wind with a slow, deliberate purpose. Within minutes, it was on them. The world shrank to a suffocating little circle of visibility, maybe 15 feet in any direction. The towering trees that had been their landmarks moments before just vanished, becoming vague, ghostly shapes that melted into the white. The temperature plummeted with the damp, penetrating cold that had nothing to do with the time of day. But the strangest part, the smell. It wasn't the clean, earthy scent of wet woods. It was a sterile, almost chemical odor. Liam later described it as being like the air after a lightning strike, that sharp smell of ozone, but mixed with something else. Something faintly metallic and deeply unsettling, like old blood. It almost felt like one of those weird phenomena you hear about sometimes, some kind of industrial, unnatural mist. It felt deeply wrong. Chloe was visibly terrified. her earlier anxiety rushing back tenfold. Ben, ever confident, just laughed it off. "It's just a little fog, babe. It'll burn off." But Liam and Maya shared a worried look. They both knew it. Ben was wrong. This wasn't just a little fog. This was something else entirely. They decided the smartest move was to stay put. Trying to navigate in this soup would be a fool's errand. They huddled around the fire pit, even though it was only 4 in the afternoon. The flames pushed back the white, but they offered very little comfort. The fog seemed to swallow sound itself, making their voices feel small and muffled. Hours passed. The fog didn't burn off. If anything, it got thicker. As daylight faded, the white world around them turned a bruised purple and then an impenetrable black. The only light came from their fire and their headlamps, whose beams just slammed into the wall of vapor and scattered, lighting up nothing. The next morning, the fog was still there. A relentless, silent siege. The happy-go-lucky mood of the first day was now a distant memory, replaced by frayed nerves and simmering tension. Ben, his bravado finally cracking, insisted they had to hike out. "I'm not going to sit here and starve," he declared. Liam argued against it, pointing out how dangerous it was, but Ben wouldn't listen, and Chloe, desperate to get back to the car, sided with him. Reluctantly, Liam agreed. He pulled out his compass, a high-end, reliable piece of gear he'd owned for years. He laid it flat on his palm. The needle spun lazily, then spun again, refusing to lock onto north. It was as if the Earth's magnetic field had just switched off. Maya pulled out her phone. "No GPS signal," she said, her voice tight. Not even a flicker. And that was the moment true. Cold fear began to set in. They weren't just in a fog. They were inside an anomaly. They were cut off, adrift in a white, silent ocean. Every direction looked the same. Every tree was a carbon copy of the last. They were lost. Utterly and completely lost. They tried following the stream, figuring it had to lead somewhere, but the fog made everything disorienting, and the banks were treacherous and slick. After an hour of tense, silent hiking, where Ben and Liam kept arguing about which way the stream was even flowing, they stopped for a break. And it was during that break that they heard it. The silence was shattered by a sound from deep within the fog, right at the edge of what they could see. It wasn't a bear or a coyote or any animal Liam could name. It was a wet, heavy tearing sound, like thick, damp canvas being slowly ripped in half. It lasted for maybe 5 seconds, and then it was followed by a series of low, guttural clicks. Click, 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 click. Lee let out a small, choked gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. Ben grabbed the small hatchet from his belt, his eyes wide, scanning the white void. "What was that?" he whispered, his voice stripped of all its earlier arrogance. "I don't know," Liam said, and he was being honest. He tried to explain it away. A sick animal, a branch falling in a weird way. But he couldn't convince himself. The sound had felt intelligent. It felt wrong. It was the sound of something being broken, something being taken apart. They didn't speak for a long time after that. They just sat there, straining their ears, listening to the suffocating quiet. The forest wasn't a peaceful retreat anymore. It was a hunting ground, and they had the distinct, chilling feeling that they were no longer at the top of the food chain. Fear is a powerful motivator. They ditched the plan to follow the stream and started moving again, this time with a frantic, desperate energy. They just wanted to put distance between themselves and that sound. As they pushed through the dense, wet undergrowth, Liam's eyes, glued to the ground, saw something that made him freeze in his tracks. "Stop," he said, holding out an arm. There, in a patch of soft mud, were tracks. But they were unlike any tracks he'd ever seen. They were huge, almost the size of a bear's print, but the shape was all wrong. There was no clear paw pad, and there looked to be 6, maybe 7, long, slender toe impressions. One of them dragged heavily, gouging a deep line in the mud, as if the creature was lame or moved with a shuffling, uneven gait. Ben stared at the tracks, his face pale. What in God's name makes a track like that? Nobody had an answer. They gave the prints a wide berth, their pace quickening. The fear wasn't a vague feeling anymore. It was a sharp, physical thing, a presence that walked right beside them in the fog. About 100 yards later, the chemical smell got stronger. now mixed with the coppery tang of fresh blood. And then they found it, a full-grown white-tailed deer, or what was left of it. It was lying on its side, eyes wide and glassy, but it hadn't been mauled by a bear or torn apart by wolves. There were no bite marks. Instead, large patches of its hide and the muscle underneath were just gone. The edges of these wounds were bizarrely smooth, almost melted looking, as if some powerful corrosive had been splashed onto the animal's body. That tearing sound they'd heard earlier suddenly made a horrible, sickening kind of sense. Chloe turned away and was sick in the bushes. Even Ben looked shaken to his very core. This was proof, terrifying proof that they were not alone, and whatever was with them in the fog wasn't just a predator, it was an abomination. That night, no one even pretended they were going to sleep. They built the fire as big as it would go and sat back to back, a tiny, terrified island of four in an endless, hostile sea of white. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of a leaf sent a jolt of adrenaline through them. It happened sometime after midnight. There was no sound of approach. One moment, there was nothing. The next, a shape blotted out the faint glow of the fire against the thin nylon wall of Liam and Maya's tent. It was tall, impossibly tall, and stick-thin. A silhouette of profound wrongness. Its limbs seemed too long for its torso, its head a small, oblong shape on a slender neck. It just stood there, motionless, for what felt like an eternity. Liam could hear his own heart hammering against his ribs. He held his breath, praying it wouldn't see them, wouldn't sense them. Then the shape moved. It lowered its head, and a long, spindly limb reached out and brushed against the side of the tent. The sound it made was unforgettable, a wet, rough scraping, like leather being dragged slowly across stone. A rasping caress. Inside the tent, Maya had her hand clamped over her mouth, her eyes squeezed shut. Liam was frozen, paralyzed by a primal fear he never knew existed. The creature lingered for a few more seconds, its silent, hulking presence filling them with a terror so absolute it was almost holy. And then, as silently as it arrived, it moved on. The shadow detached from the tent wall and dissolved back into the impenetrable blackness. They stayed awake until dawn, not speaking, not moving, just waiting. They knew, with a certainty that chilled them to the bone, that the thing hadn't just been passing by. It had been observing them, learning. It was hunting them, and it was patient. When the first gray light of dawn filtered through the fog, they were already packing. No discussion. Survival was the only goal. They abandoned the tents, the stove, anything that might slow them down. They took only water, the hatchet, and a knife. They chose a direction at random, and they ran. They ran blindly, crashing through the undergrowth, wet branches whipping at their faces. The fog was its accomplice, hiding it, guiding it. They could hear it now, moving with them. That heavy, dragging sound of its limb, the occasional wet click of its strange call. It was flanking them, herding them. Panic took over. In their frantic flight, Chloe snagged her foot on a root and went down hard with a cry of pain. Before anyone could react, the tall, gaunt shape materialized from the fog. A long, stick-like arm shot out and wrapped around Chloe's ankle. It wasn't a hand. It was more like a gnarled cluster of long, bony talons. Chloe screamed. A raw, piercing sound of pure terror as she was dragged backward into the white wall of mist. Something in Ben snapped. The fear that had been eating at his bravado for 2 days finally gave way to a surge of pure, desperate rage. "I know," he screamed, and with the hatchet raised high, he charged into the fog after her. Liam and Maya stood frozen for a split second, just listening. They heard Ben's furious roar, the sickening, wet thud of the hatchet hitting something that wasn't wood or bone, and then a scream. It was Ben's scream, but it was cut short, replaced by that same, horrifying tearing sound from before, only this time it was louder, closer, and unmistakably human. Then, silence, a profound and final silence that was more terrifying than any scream. "Liam, we have to go. Now, ow," Maya yelled, yanking on his arm. They ran. They didn't look back. They ran until their lungs burned and their legs felt like they were made of lead. They burst through a line of trees into a small natural clearing where the fog was strangely thinner, swirling in lazy eddies. And that's when they saw it. It was standing over what was left of Ben. It was at least 8 feet tall, emaciated and skeletal, with skin the color of a pale, bruised mushroom. Its limbs were disproportionately long and jointed at odd angles, like a spider's. It didn't seem to have a face, just a smooth, oblong head that tilted with a sort of curiosity as it worked. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, but as they watched in horror, a vertical slit opened down the center of its face, emitting a low, vibrating hum. It turned its eyeless head slowly, impossibly, right in their direction. It knew they were there. The sight of that creature, that impossible thing, shattered their fear-induced paralysis. Without a word, they turned and ran, fueled by an adrenaline surge so powerful it numbed the pain in their legs and lungs. They didn't know where they were going. They just knew they had to get away from that clearing. The sounds of the creature didn't follow. It seemed content with its prize. They ran for what could have been minutes or hours. Time had lost all meaning. They were just two bodies in motion, propelled forward by the singular, primal command to live. Gradually, almost too slowly to notice at first, something began to change. A patch of blue appeared high above them. The fog, their tormentor for 2 straight days, began to thin. Sunlight, weak at first, but growing stronger, pierced the canopy in golden shafts. The unnatural silence was broken by the hesitant chirping of a single bird, then another. The world was coming back to life. They stumbled on, weeping with exhaustion and relief, until their feet hit something hard and flat. A trail. A man-made trail marked with blue paint on the trees. They followed it like zombies until they heard the distant sound of an engine. They broke through the final line of trees and found themselves standing on the edge of a gravel road, staring at a park ranger's truck pulling up to a trailhead. They were safe. They had survived. The official story is that 4 friends went camping and got caught in a sudden dense fog. 2 of them, Ben and Chloe, became separated from the others and tragically succumbed to the elements. The search party found Liam and Maya's abandoned campsite just as they described. They even found the tracks Liam pointed out, but the official report dismissed them as nothing more than unusual erosional patterns in the mud. Of Ben and Chloe, no trace was ever found. Not a single shred of clothing, not one drop of blood. It was as if the forest and the fog had simply erased them. Liam and Maya told their story, of course. They told the rangers, the police, anyone who would listen. They talked about the unnatural fog, the sounds, the creature. They were met with pitying looks and quiet suggestions for grief counseling. No one believed them. And how could they? The story was impossible. But Liam and Maya know what they saw. They know that for 2 terrifying days, they were trapped in a world that played by a different set of rules. They were hunted by a creature that has no right to exist. They live with the memory of what happened in that white, silent hell and the image of that eyeless face turning towards them in the clearing. They know that the fog wasn't just weather. It was a veil. And sometimes, when that veil drops over our world, it brings things with it from whatever lies on the other side, things that are hungry. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What else is out there, hidden from us by nothing more than a thin layer of mist? What ancient horrors are just waiting for the weather to turn, waiting for their chance to hunt in a world that has forgotten they even exist? The next time you see a thick fog rolling in, maybe you should do more than just turn on your headlights. Maybe you should lock your doors, too. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the dark. If you want to hear more stories that explore the unsettling and the unexplained, make sure you're subscribed. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this story in the comments below. Until next time.